Hi, I'm Ethan from the Santa Barbara Middle School Teen Press, and today I'm here with
Linda Krop.
Nice to meet you, Linda Krop. Could you tell us a little bit about the Environmental Defense Center and what its major policy wins have been since it was founded in 1969?
Sure. So the Environmental Defense Center is a very unique organization. We're an environmental organization, but we're also a law firm. And we were started because of the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill and the fact that there were a lot of groups that organized, a lot of people that wanted to prevent another environmental disaster and protect our beautiful natural resources here. And several laws were passed immediately after the oil spill with Democratic and Republican support, signed by a Republican governor and president. And we were formed to basically serve as the lawyers for the community to help them enforce all these new laws protecting air quality, water quality, endangered species, the oceans, open space. And so that's been our mission ever since. And we have preserved over 100,000 acres of valuable open space, including, you may know about Elwood Mesa, Douglas Family Preserve, Carpinteria Bluffs, Hearst Ranch. We've also protected dozens of species that are, on the brink of extinction. We have fought a lot of offshore oil development, prevented expansion there. A lot of different types of cases.
That's awesome. What would you say your biggest policy goals for the future are?
Well, that is a great question and good timing because we just completed our new strategic plan that's going to chart our course the next 5 years. And in addition to our traditional work to save open spaces and protect air quality and water quality, we have two very important focus areas. One is climate change. And so our focus there is to help phase out fossil fuel development in our area and help with the transition to clean renewable energy. And then the second area is environmental justice. And we are going to be reaching out to groups in our area from Ventura County up through San Luis Obispo County and finding out what the environmental justice threats are in their communities and then see how we can help.
Okay. There have been lots of major corporations over time that have had little regard for anything but profit. What's a message you would like those corporations to know and understand?
Well, fortunately, we have the opportunity to deal with them directly through our legal work. So we have prevailed in stopping major companies like Exxon, Chevron, Shell, a company called BHP Billiton, which is the largest mining company in the world that wanted to build a liquefied natural gas project off of Oxnard. We recently defeated a proposal by NRG, one of the largest utility companies, from building a power plant on the beach in Oxnard as well. So fortunately, we are able to directly address the threats from what they want to do. And through that, they get the message that this is a community that is not afraid to stand up against major corporations, the largest corporations in the world. And we have a tremendous track record of using community engagement and matching that with environmental protection laws. And we've been able to prevent that type of development that would not only have an impact locally, but would also have a tremendous impact on global climate.
You've said a couple things about how you've fought companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron against big oil and that kind of corporation. What would you say some of the challenges with a switch to renewables would be?
Good question. That is a current debate right now. There's a massive proposal to construct offshore wind up in the Morro Bay area. And while we definitely want to support renewable energy for EDC and our partners, we want to make sure it's done right. And so the first thing we look at is where is the best place. So with offshore wind, we were able to help move the development area a little further offshore to minimize impacts to migrating whales and seabirds and sea turtles. And then even within the area where they're going to develop, we want to make sure that they use the best technology and they analyze what the potential effects might be and design the projects accordingly. So we're very involved in reviewing all of that and bringing in experts, bringing in experts about seabirds and experts about whales and experts about wind, so that we can have hopefully projects that will do good and be as benign as possible on the environment.
What's a project you would say has had a really big impact on the environment when it was trying to help it? Just kind of random.
Interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is I'm thinking about desal. We have limited water in our area, and in an earlier drought, when Lake Cachuma was drying up, there was a big push to import state water from the north, and people were concerned about the impacts to the San Francisco, Sacramento Bay Delta. That basically we're taking their water and impacting the ecological resources up there. So some people said, well, we should do our own water supply here, and they promoted desal, and they actually went to a vote of the people, and in some communities like Santa Barbara, people supported that. But that has its own impacts. When they take in the ocean water, they kill a lot of sea life, and then the desal facility itself is a huge emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, takes a lot of energy to operate. And then they discharge the wastewater, and that has an impact to the environment. So I think that's an example of what they, how this was looked at as we're going to avoid the impacts to the Bay Delta, but then we've created impacts here.
What would an organization like the EDC do about that? How would they fight against that or support that?
It was really challenging. I was here at the time, and because of the drought, there was so much pressure. And we did represent some local groups, because originally the desal project, this massive industrial facility, was going to be permitted as an emergency, and there was going to be no environmental or public review. So we did force the city to take the time to prepare an environmental impact report that the public could comment on and then give more information to the city council. So we did accomplish that. And I'm sure that resulted in some changes to the design of the project, but there have been times when we probably could have brought lawsuits challenging the city's use of the desal project, and politically I think that would have been a real challenge, because people here are so desperate to have a sustainable water supply. So we and groups like Santa Barbara Channel Keeper and others have instead tried to influence the city. For example, we got the California Coastal Commission to require the city to consider other water supplies, like more reclaimed water. Mm-hmm. So we've been trying to more influence the future, but I feel like a lot of the environmental impacts have still occurred to the detriment of the environment.
How could you tell me a little bit about the political shift around environmental policy? A while ago, you were saying about a Republican governor, how he was supporting the movement to support climate change, and now it's more one-sided. Could you tell me a little bit about what you think shifted there?
Whenever I talk about the history of environmental activism or the Environmental Defense Center, I always talk about the beginnings, because I think it's really important for people to understand that environmental protection did not used to be a partisan issue. all of the laws that were passed in the early 70s had massive bipartisan support, and they were all signed by President Nixon and Governor Reagan. And in fact, there was one law that Nixon would not sign, the Clean Water Act, and it had so much bipartisan support that Congress overrode the veto. So that's how much support there was. The Endangered Species Act, the author was a Republican, Pete McCloskey from California. I think it's really important that people know that, because we can go back to that. There's no reason we can't. And I think that's the foremost thing for people to understand, that, you know, that these issues affect everybody, they help everybody, whether you care about public health or whether you care about, you know, natural resources. It really, you know, either way, these laws are important. You know, we don't have a climate law. We have some things in the, you know, Inflation Reduction Act. We have some things under, you know, vehicle mileage standards, but we don't have a law dealing with climate change, and people have tried. And so I think that needs to continue to be, you know, put on the table. You know, it used to be, you didn't even hear climate change talked about in elections, especially the presidential election. 2008, Obama never mentioned climate change. Now it's mentioned all the time. So we're making progress. You know, people are, I think, bipartisan. There's an understanding that we are dealing with climate change and the impacts. We just need to figure out how to come together to do something about it.
That's really interesting how it shifted, though. Could you tell me a little bit about the disinformation campaign and how that affected the political switch, if it did?
I think there's a couple factors here. I think, you know, disinformation, you know, downplaying the effects of climate change, let alone the, you know, human contributions to that, and companies like ExxonMobil hiding, you know, the information that they had for so long. But I think it's also a misunderstanding of the regulatory approach to dealing with climate change. And, you know, going back to your previous question, starting with really Newt Gingrich in the 1980s, and Reagan before that, even Reagan starting it probably, and then Newt Gingrich picking up on it, setting up this this impression that regulation is bad for business. That was very big for President Reagan, to try to deregulate you know, governmental authority that affects business. And then Newt Gingrich took it to another level, the Contract on America. And that became a Republican talking point, that regulations are bad for business. And so you need regulations to protect the environment, so then that's bad for business too. So I think it really goes back to the early 80s. And I know since then Congress has tried maybe more the carrot approach than the stick approach, and the Inflation Reduction Act providing money for renewable energy. But you need both.
Do you think the carrot approach is working?
Not fast enough. We need both. We need regulations that limit carbon emissions and other types of environmental harm, while we're also doing what we can do to support, you know, the expeditious development of renewable energy. We need both.
Kind of switching tacks a little bit, what originally got you interested in the environment and environmental law?
I grew up in a family that was very socially and politically active, more in social areas like civil rights, farm worker rights, education, things like that. But I always loved the outdoors. We would go to national parks when I was a child, state parks, and I loved that. And then when I went to UCSB, I was able to meld the two, my love of nature and the environment with activism, because by then, environmental activism was a big deal, and especially in Santa Barbara. And at UCSB, I got involved with a couple issues, including fighting the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which is now one of our cases. But it was at UCSB that I really was able to become an environmental advocate and activist, and then I wanted to make a career of that.
What would you tell someone who's interested in a career about regenerative or about the sustainable movement and the environmental movement? How would you encourage them to do that, and what advice would you give someone interested?
I would say, get involved. Probably, some people want to, especially a lot of youth are really committed to getting involved regarding climate change, which can be kind of overwhelming. And so what I would say is, maybe that's your path, in which case, find a group that is working on that issue and get involved with them. There are several groups that work on climate change, and so you can get involved with other groups. But also, look at your community. Is there something you care about? Like, do you care about the health of our creeks? Do you care about ocean water pollution? Do you care about plastics? So what I find, what makes me happy about working at EDC and motivate at EDC is that everything we work on is local, even though it may have like a national or global impact. So when we're dealing with climate change, what we're doing here is we're trying to defeat a new power plant, or we're trying to, stop more oil drilling. So to me, doing something local keeps me grounded, but it also makes me feel like I can actually make a difference.
That kind of goes along with the saying, speak global, act local. Yes. Do you feel like the EDC is having that big global impact that the local speaking is working? And do you think that would also apply to someone who's interested in making a big change around a smaller community?
Absolutely. I'm glad you tied it to that saying. Think globally, act locally. I need to make a sign in my office that says that. Absolutely. For example, one of our cases resulted in terminating 40 oil leases off of our coast, which was half of them. So we could have twice as many platforms out there, and just think about the climate impact of that. We fought a liquefied natural gas project that would have had global climate impacts, because you're extracting natural gas in Australia or Indonesia or Malaysia, and then you're shipping that gas, across oceans. And we hired an expert on climate change, and he analyzed the greenhouse gas emissions, across the world. No one else was doing that, and so we brought that to light. Like, by defeating this one project, which we did, we had a huge impact on preventing more climate impacts.
What would you say there's a lot of big industries like the shipping industry and the transportation industry. What industry would you say is the first to tackle for the EDC, would you say?
That's a tough one. I would say because of the abundance of fossil fuel, development in our area, that still, almost 50 years later is still our number one, focus, oil and gas development. But we have dealt with the shipping issue as well. We've done such a good job through the Clean Air Act of reducing emissions in our area from more industrial type polluters. They're very strictly regulated. Regulations work. So at this point, the number one source of air pollution in our area is actually from shipping going through the channel, because those emissions, they burn really dirty fuel. Those emissions come on shore. So we have been partnering with the air districts here on a vessel speed reduction program. And we started that to protect whales, because when ships go through the channel, they can also strike and kill whales. And we learned from the whale experts that if you slow the ships down, you're less likely to have a fatality. And then we learned when the ships slow down, the emissions are less. So then the local air districts and the state air resources board said, whoa, this is great. So we have a program to slow the ships down. It's having a huge reduction in air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And now we're working with Assembly Member Greg Hart on a bill, Assembly Bill 2298, to expand that program statewide because of the huge reduction in emissions from ships.
What you were saying about how ships have such a big impact, there's kind of and they were running on dirty fuels, there's kind of a sliding scale there. If you take out the fossil fuels, then the ships can't power it. Could you give me a couple more examples of how doing one thing would affect a lot of others?
Well, the ships mainly burn really dirty bunker fuel. And so there are efforts to try to clean up the kind of fuel that the ships use. I mean, ideally, eventually, they would be run on like electricity or battery or whatever. And I think we're a ways from that. But you're right that, as we phase out fossil fuels, we have to look at what the impacts of that are going to be and what alternatives might be available. So, the first step is to make them use cleaner fuel. And that applies to the cruise ships as well. That was one of the measures that the City Council in Santa Barbara just passed to try to get the cruise ships that come here to use cleaner fuel. And then eventually, look at even renewable sources of fuel.
What would you say the biggest lesson you've learned is during this quest for environmental and climate change reduction?
Don't give up. You can make a difference. We are the epitome of the David versus Goliath story. We're a very small nonprofit organization, and yet we have been able to prevail against all of these major global corporations. So I think to have faith that we can make a difference, don't give up, be strong by developing partnerships and working with organizations like the Environmental Defense Center. We have lawyers, we have scientists, we'll represent groups for free, or if they can make a donation, that's great. But don't be isolated. See what other groups are available, what other resources are available, and just know that you really can make a difference.
Well, on that, thank you so much, Linda. It was a pleasure meeting and speaking with you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Those were great questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.